Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harinkyu, and today is episode number 9, the mainstreaming of psilocybin mushrooms. Hello, and good morning. Thank you for joining me today on the podcast. We are going to be talking about a very trendy topic, psilocybin mushrooms, and my thoughts around the legalization and the mainstreaming of psilocybin as someone who works with these plants in a sacred ceremonial setting. And I'm going to start by telling you a story. About a year ago, I had a prophetic shaman type dream about the psilocybin work. It may have actually been a little more than a year ago. And in my dreams, whatever comes up, depending on the type of dream I have, and I believe there's 3 or 4 different types of dreams that we have, I take this information very seriously. I dream about my clients, and I dream about the future, I dream about the earth, spiritual contacts, other crazy things. I'll have to make dreaming a whole topic at some point. But in this dream, it was about working with mushrooms in the public eye in a ceremony setting. And in the dream, I was in a house with a few core people. We were doing sacred work together with the mushrooms, and it felt really nice and good. And then all of a sudden, celebrities started joining in on the party, and then that grew to celebrities and paparazzi and followers and a whole bunch of other people. And before I knew it, this house was full of people that I didn't know. And they were partying and they were doing drugs and they weren't really taking it seriously. They were kind of trashing the place. And I knew that it was my time to exit. Now, the theme of this party was around doing medicine work. It was around working with the mushrooms in the ceremony setting. And, this indicator of new people entering the scene, of it not feeling and being the way that it was at that point in time, and knowing that I was going to have to exit at some point. So I have been working with mushrooms in a sacred way publicly with other people for 7 or 8 years at this point. It is something that is more of a way of life. It's very much tied into the shamanism piece. And actually have zero experience taking any substances in a recreational setting. My first work with psychedelics was ayahuasca. Um, and I had never touched anything like that when I was growing up or when I was younger. So I only know mushrooms in the sacred setting, and since I started working with them, it was super clear that I was not allowed to work with them in any other setting. Um, Even tried to take them once years ago before going on a hike, and nothing happened for 6, 7, 8 hours. And then I got home and I got hit with the medicine, and they were like, "You can't do that. That is not what we're for." And so I have some pretty strong beliefs around mushrooms and the way that we're working with them, the way that I believe they want to be worked with, the way that they've told me they want to be worked with. So it's a whole thing for me. And this dream was really indicative of, hey, the collective consciousness space of mushrooms is going to change. And when it changes, that's your time to exit the space. And I've been feeling this call recently to put down the mushrooms in the way that I've been working with them professionally, quote unquote, professionally, because the collective consciousness space has changed. And I want to talk about collective consciousness a little bit because it's very relevant in this case, but also in a lot of other things that I talk about on this podcast. And this is a concept that I think cannabis is probably a better example for this. So if you take every person who is using cannabis, not necessarily working with it, distinction in words here. They're using cannabis to numb a pain, to go to sleep, to feel better, to make it through their day. They are using this plant, controlling this plant to avoid something and create the outcome that they desire. And so, all of the people who are using it to avoid something, the things that they're avoiding goes into their personal shadow, and it also goes into the collective shadow. So as who I am, I cannot even touch cannabis. As soon as I try to, I immediately go into the collective shadow of avoidance, that collective place of pain, of everything that people are trying to avoid by smoking cannabis. And honestly, it's a torturous place to be. I stay under the influence of cannabis for 7 to 10 days when I touch it because it's so heavy and so dense and so gross, honestly. And that's the collective consciousness of this plant medicine. So it's a certain thing that is created through collective activities um, involved with a plant medicine. And one of the things that we do not understand as a society at this point in time is how these collective consciousness pieces play into the big picture. And so when we're working with a plant that is a door opener, it opens the door to other dimensions, and then we do so without intention, we do so without care and awareness. We're creating things we don't know how to interpret, contain, heal. And so the same thing is starting to happen with psilocybin. Now that it's become very mainstream and it's become legalized, there is a lot of using it instead of working with it. So when I work with plants, it is a very collaborative effort. They tell me how they want to be worked with. They tell me what they need. They tell me what other plant allies want to come in and work with us. They tell me what they need from me. They tell me what kind of dosage they want to be worked with. I mean, the communication is honestly next level with plants when you take the time to build the relationship with them. And so now that we have so much mainstreaming coming in with psilocybin, and you know that the majority of it is not people collaborating with plants, they are using them to gain something. So, side tangent here, this is the nasty patriarchy energy that we're all up in arms about, that we want to change, yet we're all contributing to it. So when you're using a spirit, a being, a plant to gain something, and you are making the decision of how to work with it, you are controlling it. You are making it do something for you. Now, in any other setting, this would not be okay, right? It's not okay when we make friends. It's not okay when we date. We don't treat other living beings like that. Why would we do it with mushrooms? Again, it's because we don't have awareness in our culture of the significance of these beings. But I do. And so this is what I see. When I see psilocybin becoming mainstream, I'm seeing this control piece. I'm seeing that nasty patriarchy energy is just growing. It just looks different than it did 20 or 30 years ago. Now the assault is against plants. And the scary part about that is that plants are portals, especially psilocybin mushrooms. They open up doorways to places that you can't even imagine. And so when we start abusing them, using them, taking advantage of them, we're opening up doorways to places you can't even imagine. And you can kind of let your imagination run away with that for a moment because it's an important piece to this puzzle. So, due to the nature of my work, the primordial shamanism, the original shamanism, I work with massive collective amounts of energy, massive portals, like original kind of creation energy. And so, automatically, my work taps into these big, big spaces. And so, now that psilocybin has become so mainstream, that collective consciousness of psilocybin has changed. That place that you can go, that place that you can plug into and tap into, it is very much changed. And as a result, I'm being asked to step back from a lot of the work that I'm doing in the public space. And, although that's hard and sad, I can also feel that something else is coming forward, that we are entering an era where we don't need to take a psychedelic in order to cross over. We just need to do the work on ourselves in a certain way to open that portal within us, to open that ability to take down the veil or take down the walls between us and the other side. And that's one of my abilities, is to teach people how to do that without the assistance of plant medicine in the way that it's being brought to the public right now. So there's a couple other facets of this mainstreaming that I want to talk about, because honestly, I don't think a lot of people are talking about it, and I think those who are talking about it from a space of like scarcity and finger pointing, and all I want to do is provide some perspectives, provide some things to chew on. I don't think that our world is good or bad or right or wrong. I don't actually believe in those concepts. I think we have things that are created from a place of love and things that are created from a place of fear. And ultimately, we end up taking the path that we need to take, whether that's harmful, trauma, black magic, you name it. If that's the path we need to take, that's the path we're going to take, regardless of what we want. But I do think that knowledge is power. And so providing the public with a perspective on this, I believe, will be helpful. So one of my biggest concerns coming in with the mainstreaming of psilocybin is the type of practitioners who are drawn to it. So when I had my facility several years ago, I was having people come and work with me who were lying to me about their identity, who pretended to be other people, who would pretend that they were not under the influence because as soon as I started asking them questions, like doing some of the deeper healing work with them, they were like, "Oh, I'm done. It's time to go." And they would literally take off. Or they would write these like ridiculous reviews about my work, like that there were dead plants in the office, like of all things. And then their reviews would mysteriously disappear on Google. And I would come to find out that they were actually high level people who were involved in the legalization process in Oregon. They were trying to see how I was running my facility. They were trying to see my protocol for apprenticeship. They were trying to look at what I was doing so that they could copy it, and doing so under the guise of being someone else. And to me, my job as a shaman is to read the signs. And if you can't reach out authentically and directly and say, "Hey, we're doing this thing, we'd love you to help, we'd love you to be a part of it," and instead you're lying to gain information, like right there, that really sets out the vibration of what's being created through the Oregon movement with psilocybin. And that happened numerous times. People who are now on boards down there, who own manufacturing facilities, who own service centers. This is the base vibration that's underneath their practice, which means everyone who comes to sit in one of their psilocybin experiences is going to tap into that vibration because that's how this works. So right off the bat, as Oregon started rolling out their psilocybin program and I started interacting with the people involved, it scared the crap out of me. It was really scary to see what kind of people had their fingers in this. And that's not to say that there were not also wonderful people. And again, whatever the energy is at the foundation will permeate everybody's experience. So, not doing your own work, not being upfront, transparent, vulnerable with other people, trying to steal information, that's really an indicator of this is not a safe space to go into a medicine ceremony for anybody. And therefore, I wouldn't recommend it. I know there are great people. I have great referrals and references for the psilocybin work, but in general, a lot of the public stuff that's happening down in Oregon does not feel good. It does not look good. And there's a reason why many of the service centers have shut down, for sure. I also do not believe that there is any program that can properly train you to serve psilocybin. Zero. Zero programs, and especially ones that don't require you to take it under the supervision of a shaman or a therapist multiple times, not just once, but like multiple times with adequate integration periods in between, which is months, if not years. You cannot possibly have the skill set to work with this medicine in the short periods of time that they're rolling out people. And a big part of that is not understanding the damage that can occur in these spaces, not always intentionally, but through negligence. Do you understand that, if you have any predatory energy within you, that is triggered inside the person you're sitting with, you're attacking them energetically and spiritually, and they're going to go away wounded. Now, newsflash, we all have predatory energy, and most of us aren't aware of it. And so these things that are sitting in our shadow, that are sitting in the background, that we're not able to see, that we're not able to look at, actually influences people in this multidimensional space that they go into when they take psilocybin. And the damage and trauma that happens in those spaces is purely by negligence. I'm not even talking about the ones where intentional trauma is happening, and many of those are occurring in Oregon because I have people who come to me for recovery from them. But just the negligence ones, you're inflicting trauma on a soul level. You're talking about multi-dimensional trauma. You are not talking about the cut and dry childhood trauma, which occasionally goes into like ancestral work and past life work. We're talking about big level soul trauma, and for which you need shamans to repair. You need shamans to help you understand that, navigate that, and heal that. And that's why we have a resurgence of so many people who are having the shamanic call, because we're here to do some big level trauma repair work. And a lot of it is tied to the mainstreaming of psychedelics. So that's something, interesting to ponder as we watch these get really popular. The other thing I want to talk about is the container for this work. So, set and setting is something that people love to throw around, but don't actually have a super deep understanding of. So, when I work with someone in a medicine space, my container is a mother container. It is extremely nurturing, extremely loving. I prepare every meal for every group very, very intentionally. I cook it myself, I handle it myself, I pick out the ingredients myself because every single thing matters. Everything I put on the altar matters. Everything I wear, even when I'm picking out my socks and I'm like, okay, is this a group that's gonna need the vibration of SpongeBob, or do we need the vibration of like silly foxes? Because it only takes a second of somebody having a hard time and looking down at my socks and having the vibration that they need to shift them out of the dense space that they're in. So, the container for medicine work is everything, and that is the ceremony piece. You have to be aware and intentional and carefully craft the space that you go into with people when you're dealing with a multidimensional medicine. So, that also goes for, where are your plants coming from? Where are the rose that's in your tea or the food that you're ingesting? All of those things also have energy signature, and the person who tends to those plants and picks those plants also goes into those plants that you're taking. And I know that this is very outside the box for a lot of people, but in my work, it's super important. So if you, for example, if you have psilocybin mushrooms that you're working with someone, and you're getting it from the dealer down the street or some of these big underground places that grow them in Oregon, the energy of the person who is tending them and picking them is all up in those mushrooms, and you will swallow it. You will digest it. You will take on things that are not yours. Your entire experience will be colored through the lens of that person. Honestly, that's wild to me. But I see it time and time again. And so when we think about the legalization of psilocybin and the way that it's been put in these like really confined boxes, what do you think that does to the experience? What do you think it does to the potential of the outcome of that experience? So you have all the people making money off of it, talk about predatory energy. You have the state who's doing all the restrictions and the licensing. You have the lab, the grower, the service center employees, the person, two people who's facilitating for you. All of those people have their energy into this space, and not all of them are coming from a pure hearted place, right? Think about that for a second. So, this plant has been grown in a sterile environment, which plants do not like, by the way. Probably used whatever they needed to keep it alive in this sterile environment. You have the lab that's like testing it to make sure this and that. So, really analyzing it, and then you have the person who runs the business, who runs the service center. They're making money. It's a businessman. You have the people who are facilitating, who went through some program and are not making as much money as they should based on the level of work that they're doing. Like it's if you look at the big picture of that and you look at ultimately the person who ends up in that space taking that substance, you can see the level of impact that it will have on their experience. Additionally, when we're talking about bringing plant medicines or psychedelics into the clinical space is a business model. The idea is to get you to come back. It's to get you to have a prescription. It's to get you to pay monies regularly. It's patenting things that grow in nature so that they can be profited off of. So I worked with a lot of people who went through the John Hopkins studies where they were testing psilocybin for its like what it could do, and they all said the same thing, that it worked but only for a period of time, and then they felt like they needed it again. And I can tell you, when you do this on a spiritual ceremony level, it's not like that. Sure, there are some people who feel called to work with me, a certain number of times in 1 year, or maybe they come back annually, but it's not this 8 to 16 weeks. Oh, it's done. I have to go back and get more. That is the profit model. That is the Americanized healing model. It's not to actually heal you. It's to make things better for a little while. It's to alleviate certain symptoms, but honestly, you're not getting to the core, so they're going to come back. And then that means you need to go back for more. And so bringing psilocybin into both of these spaces, the clinical piece, but also this like service center facilitator piece in Oregon, neither of them feel really great. And neither of them have the kind of outcome that I know us as a collective really want. We want to do actual holistic healing, but we're not given the opportunity. And then, of course, people can't find people like me because I don't have all the fancy certifications or I don't have a fancy marketing team. I'm out here just living life as myself, offering this in the way that I offer it, which is profoundly life changing. But because there's so much other noise, you can't find it. So, the last thing I want to say about this is my experience with facilitators has been extremely varied. I have some wonderful, wonderful people that I recommend clients to all the time who do a great job holding space, who really do their own work in a way that allows them to hold good, clean, heart-centered space. Um, and then I've had a lot of nightmares. I've had a lot of people come to me for repair work and they'll get on my table and I can see their energy system is ripped to shreds or they're carrying massive amounts of energy from someone else because they were not kept safe during during the ceremony or facilitated experience. A lot of people who are re-traumatized to the point where their nervous system is just like totally frayed. Their inner children are nowhere to be seen because their dose was too high. And that's not even like intentional harm, right? That's you pushed down a door that wasn't ready to be opened yet, and now you've been re-traumatized and set yourself back 10 years. But I think, you know, the one that hurts my heart the most is the people who unintentionally disempower other people. So like I've invited people who would call themselves like medicine men or carriers or facilitators into my space and watched them talk clients out of things. Like I witnessed a Kambo practitioner working with someone, and the client was like, I feel like it needs to be placed here. And I watched him talk her out of it for like 15 minutes. So, right there, you have told someone that their intuition is wrong because you think you know better than what they're being told inside their body. And now you've added medicine to that equation. So it's like disempowering times a bazillion because the medicine work amplifies everything. And I think that happens a lot in these spaces where we don't just allow people to feel what they're feeling, to have their experience without, on some level, judging them, influencing them, trying to move them in one direction or another, rather than being an open channel, rather than being a clean, safe container. And in truth, that requires a lot of personal work. It requires a lot of vulnerability, accountability, requires having lots of peers and lots of teachers. And for me, it requires a solid relationship with the spirits. Because if I am not if I'm not acting in integrity, if I'm not being authentic, if I'm not being humble, the medicine will kick my butt. She always sets me straight. She always holds me accountable. When I think that I know too much, when I think that I know better, immediately I am shown otherwise. And, I think that's one of the greatest gifts of doing this work in the spiritual realm rather than doing it in the mainstream way. Um, anyway, this whole psilocybin facilitator rollout, legalization, mainstreaming of psychedelics has really been on my heart and on my mind as I've been called to let this work go a little bit more, or shift it at the very least into extremely shamanic realm. Um, I think that collectively this is the trajectory that we need to go in, because if it weren't, we wouldn't be going in this direction. But it doesn't make it any less easy for me to witness as a practitioner, as a plant medicine person who works with the spirits and who sees the trauma in real time. And honestly, the trauma that's coming for us collectively from doing this in a more mainstream way, it's terrifying. And it definitely lends to needing more shaman out there, more people who can do the multidimensional work, who can do the repair work and have the relationship with the spirits. Um, and for that, I feel honored that I'm in a space where I get to train shamans and help people find their gifts as we become a more multidimensional earth situation. So, thank you for joining me on this podcast today. I appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.